So this old man is almost 60 and still have to hunt monsters. His peers are all either sword saints and masters in their craft, but our old man here only got the skill artifact Devourer when he awakened. In the beginning, he experimented by burning and even frying artifacts, thinking it would change the results, but none of those attempts made any difference. Now, 30 years had passed since those pointless experiments, and Shin had abandoned them long ago. Every time he absorbed an artifact of the proper rank, he used mana synchronization, eventually realizing that this was the correct way to activate his absorption skill, though he discovered it far too late. So this dumbass just don't know how to use his skill. That's the reason he's weak all along. Other players had awakened with overwhelming power from the start, while Shin struggled without understanding his own ability. Because of this, he no longer expected any major improvement. He believed there should be some kind of instruction tied to the skill, but nothing appeared. His assistant admitted that very little information existed about this ability, apologizing for not being able to help further. He thought that if he had started a family back then, he could already be a grandfather now, spending time with his grandchildren. Instead, his life had been filled with regret and disappointment. He understood that his star curator was not at fault, yet those feelings remained. Shin could not forget the man who once saved his life, and he had spent decades trying to become like him. Now, he felt completely worn out and defeated. He wished he could become young again, repeating that thought over and over while his star curator remained silent in thought. Shin then declared that he would retire, explaining that his star curator should find another player, as their contract would soon end. In response, the star curator opened his book and activated something unknown. Suddenly, a bright light filled everything around them. Surprising Shin, he looked toward the constellation, unable to understand what was happening. His body felt extremely heavy, as if it were starting to dissolve. The last thing he saw was the constellation slowly fading away. The scene then shifted to a broadcast where reporters listened as awakened individuals discussed dungeons and gates. The head of the Hyunjung Corporation explained how players joined the system, describing dungeons as stepping stones, while gates were portals to unknown dimensions. These territories required players to explore and pioneer them. This interview aired on television, something Shin had watched many years ago, yet now it felt as if time itself had reversed. The young man sat on a sofa, cleaning his sword while feeling confused. Though several days had passed, he gradually began to understand the changes that had occurred. After losing consciousness, he had awakened inside his old apartment, the same place he had lived in 30 years ago. The guy began to examine his body and realized that he was no longer a 55-year-old man but a young 25-year-old with all his memories intact. Shin spent a long time trying to understand why he had returned to the past, eventually concluding that the constellation must have performed a miracle for him. Although he remained puzzled, he gradually accepted the situation and realized that the reason no longer mattered. Now it was time to get to work. The young man held a venom dagger in his hands, a basic bronze-level artifact he had recently acquired through luck. While the weapon was low-ranked, it still possessed a hidden ability. Although its assimilation speed was slow due to his lack of use, its hidden effect was what truly mattered. Soon the young man began synchronizing his mana with the venom dagger. Shin entered a state of unconsciousness, a special space that had to be passed through in order to consume the artifact. Each time, the process brought a sense of anticipation, as it was impossible to predict what form the result would take. Soon, a huge plate of grilled chicken appeared before him, and a notification informed him that the preparation for absorbing the venom dagger was complete. Shin felt relieved that the manifestation was normal this time, as he had feared it might turn into something unpleasant like swamp creatures. The dish looked appetizing enough to eat even without hunger. The absorption began, and upon completion, a notification appeared stating that he had gained a dexterity bonus of +2. He also acquired the hidden skill Demon Bash. The venom dagger, now fully absorbed, gradually disappeared until it was completely gone. It was a very useful outcome. The young man had gained both new abilities and satisfied his hunger in the process. Although he felt a slight sense of regret over losing the dagger, he acknowledged that obtaining the skill had been his goal from the start. With that settled, it was time to prepare for work. The massive gates stood along one of the city streets, serving as a portal to a dungeon for a team of players. The group was making their final preparations when the captain of the porters approached the captain of the players and reported that a new recruit had joined their ranks just a few days ago. His name was Shin Sang-yoon. It was soon revealed that this new recruit would be assigned directly to the players' team. The captain of the porters was surprised, as the recruit had originally been meant to join his group first. The leader of the players explained that all necessary documents had already been signed, leaving no room for issue. The porter captain could not understand the decision, considering that the young man had only recently awakened and had not even graduated from the academy, and such recruits had never been added directly to the main team before. However, the player captain firmly stated that the matter had already been decided and would not be discussed further. He warned that he was overseeing all operations, including group management and contribution distribution, and implied that interference would not be tolerated. The porter captain apologized and withdrew. The leader did not see any reason for such concern, as the porters had no authority in the matter anyway. At that moment, another player questioned the decision to accept the newcomer, pointing out that it seemed irrational. The captain explained that if anyone were to die during the dungeon raid, it would likely be the newcomer rather than the core members, as everyone understood the limitations of a first-level player. Just then, a young, handsome, and determined man named Shin approached the group, introduced himself, and stated that he would be working with them from that day forward. The porters immediately disliked the newcomer for bypassing them and joining the main team directly. Shin noticed that he had drawn everyone's attention, though he had expected no less. The captain greeted him warmly and personally welcomed him, noting that he had arrived on time. He quickly observed Shin's weapon and appeared unsure how to comment on it. Shin explained that he used a longsword and added that he had learned its basics by watching videos on YouTube. The captain remarked that a longsword was one of the most difficult weapons to handle in battle, but Shin insisted that he would at least try to defend himself. The leader commented that the young man had a strong spirit, which he considered a positive trait. Once introductions were complete, the captain announced the start of the raid. The players drew their weapons and began entering the dungeon through the massive gate. Upon entry, the newcomer was instructed to remain near the exit. The group advanced in high spirits, joking among themselves and estimating how many monsters they would defeat that day. The captain glanced at Shin and recalled his mention of learning from videos, concluding that the newcomer had no real understanding of the dangers inside a dungeon. Despite this, the young man carried himself with confidence, likely because he had only recently awakened and believed he was ready to handle anything. The group leader devised a strategy for clearing the dungeon, and it turned out that the orc dungeon was considered a last resort for newbies. The captain was certain that the newcomer would soon realize this himself. Finally, he entered the gate and immediately sensed that something was wrong, as what he saw was beyond comprehension. At the entrance of the dungeon, there were traces of battle along with the body of a slain goblin. Looking deeper inside, the players saw a newcomer standing with his long sword over a pile of destroyed orcs. Orcs were creatures commonly seen in games, novels, and fantasy films. They resembled humans to some extent, which led players to form assumptions about them. Orcs seemed weak because they lacked special abilities or refined combat skills. Compared to monsters like dragons, they were considered weak, crude, and brutal. Because of this, many overconfident beginners would recklessly charge into battle against orcs without thinking. Players understood that orcs had primitive instincts and rushed to attack them, only to soon find themselves overwhelmed and unable to fight back. Orcs were towering creatures, about 1.5 times the size of a normal human, possessing immense physical strength capable of crushing a person with ease. For this reason, sending a newbie against them was almost a death sentence. The group of players slowly advanced deeper into the dungeon. One of them explained that the newcomer would not receive any special treatment and would have to survive on his own, as no one would protect him. The captain of the porters grew uneasy since this newcomer had only just awakened and had already become a player. Shin responded with a calm smile, assuring them that he would do his best. Another player remarked that effort alone would not be enough and that he needed to perform exceptionally well, implying that trying alone might not save him. Shin asked if he could take the front line when they encountered a monster, but before anyone could respond, a massive goblin wielding a giant axe suddenly appeared behind them. Shin observed the creature with excitement, seeing it as his first battle since returning, and declared that he would handle the orc himself. The monster swung its axe, but one of the players barely managed to block it with his shield, clearly shaken. Although he defended himself, he could not understand how this newcomer planned to fight effectively in such a situation. Shin stated that there was no need for anyone to save him, but his words were interpreted as arrogance. Instead of acting, the newcomer seemed to be speaking too much. At that moment, the goblin swung its axe again, and the player was on the verge of death. The captain intervened just in time, striking with his shield and knocking the monster off balance. He then ordered his subordinates to stop hesitating and immediately engage in battle, before commanding them to retreat while he handled the enemy himself. The enraged orc retaliated fiercely, but the captain countered swiftly, driving his dagger into the monster's heart as yellow blood poured out. The team cheered, believing the fight was over. However, the orc was still alive, growling as its eyes burned with fury. Despite its wounds, it gathered its strength and lunged again. The captain barely avoided the attack, realizing the situation was far from over. As the leader, he was expected to be the strongest, yet even he struggled to deal significant damage. He launched another attack and successfully struck the orc again, his speed and agility allowing him to stab the monster once more. This time, the orc collapsed onto its back, and everyone assumed it was finally dead. The captain dismissed the situation as nothing serious and checked on his team, while the players praised him and confirmed their safety was due to his actions. Just as the captain was about to signal the team to move forward, a low growl echoed through the dungeon, putting everyone on alert. A group of orcs was approaching, each one armed and equally dangerous. Leading them was a particularly menacing orc with a beard and long fangs, likely their leader. The players were stunned and waited for instructions. The captain, caught off guard, concluded that retreating would be the safest option after assessing the situation. Realizing that defeating even one orc had been difficult, and facing a group was too risky, Shin then interrupted by asking if he could attempt to fight them, shocking the others, who questioned his sanity and believed he should have remained near the exit. The captain began explaining that while initiative was admirable, the newcomer had only just awakened, but Shin ignored him, drew his sword, and charged toward the approaching orcs. The newcomer rushed forward and cleanly sliced the first orc in half with his long sword, leaving the team stunned as they struggled to comprehend what had just happened. Shin reassured them not to worry, admitting that the cut was not perfect due to his current low level, before turning his attention back to the fight. There was no time for discussion as another orc advanced. Enraged by their fallen comrade, the remaining orcs charged together without hesitation. Shin, despite his low level, relied on his vast experience, tightening his grip on his sword. He moved swiftly, striking decisively and cutting through the air with precision as he engaged the oncoming enemies. The young man moved with precision, and each swing of his sword landed flawlessly. Over the years of his previous hunting career, he had slain countless monsters like these. The players no longer considered retreating, as they gradually realized that the newcomer was fully capable of eliminating all the orcs. Soon the last orc stood before him. It was enormous, heavily armed and protected by armor, shields, knee guards, and various pieces of equipment. However, none of this proved effective. The creature was bulky and slow, allowing Sheen to close the distance and slice through its tough skin with his long sword. The captain warned that the orc's thick hide would not be easily penetrated by such attacks, and the situation appeared grim. The monster remained powerful, swinging its axe and preventing anyone from getting close. Despite the rage bait, the rookie remained calm and focused. He urged his comrades not to panic and to stay composed. Shin then activated his Demon Bash skill, causing the monster's body to tremble as it lost control of its movements. The interference from the attack rendered it unable to react properly. Shin immediately recognized that his skill had taken effect and used the brief opening to strike. His long sword, both lengthy and razor-sharp, cut cleanly through the monster. Moments later, the massive orc collapsed, its body completely severed before the group. The players, including their captain, struggled to comprehend what they had just witnessed. Everyone knew that this newcomer had only awakened recently, yet he possessed a powerful skill capable of disrupting an enemy's movements. It was not just a minor effect, but something far more significant. The players began to think that the rookie was far more experienced than he appeared, as he wielded his long sword with practiced precision. Many of them even expressed interest in seeing the video he had previously mentioned, believing it might explain his abilities. The captain was equally astonished, as he had never seen interference used so effectively against an armed orc, especially by someone so inexperienced. He questioned where such a skill could have come from. At that moment, Shun received a notification that his level had increased. While the exact level was not his concern, he had gained the evasion skill, which he considered highly beneficial. He was then prompted to enhance one of his attributes, and without hesitation, Shun chose to increase his luck. In his past life, he had realized too late how valuable this trait was, as it directly influenced the chances of obtaining rare artifacts. The captain approached Shin and asked if he truly was who he claimed to be, then demanded to know the name of the skill he had used and where he had acquired it. Shin could have revealed the truth about his past life and years of combat experience, but he chose to keep it to himself. Instead, he explained that he had obtained the skill upon awakening. This answer angered the captain, who believed the young man was being dishonest. He insisted that Shin stop avoiding the question and reveal the truth, but his attention was suddenly drawn to the weapon in Shin's hands. The long sword appeared unusual, and upon closer inspection it seemed to be a diamond-level artifact. Shin offered the weapon for inspection, stating that the captain could examine it himself. The captain accepted and carefully observed the blade, only to find that it appeared to be nothing more than a worn two-handed sword classified as an ordinary artifact. This discovery confused him even further. He could not understand how such a weapon could be used to defeat orcs so effortlessly. The captain felt frustrated, having spent decades exploring dungeons without ever obtaining such an impressive skill. At that moment, another player approached and reported that the dungeon's middle boss had awakened, drawing the captain's attention back to the situation. Though still troubled by what he had witnessed, he knew that decisions had to be made. He then stated that while defeating ordinary orcs was manageable, they were now facing a far greater threat, implying that the newcomer's skill would likely be ineffective against an orc demon. Shin, however, had his own reasons for joining this group, though he kept them hidden. Turning to the group, Shin requested permission to claim the artifact if he succeeded in defeating the orc demon, shocking everyone present. The others were stunned by his boldness, while he calmly explained that he sought the reward granted for defeating such a creature. In this team, rewards were distributed based on individual contributions. The artifact in question, known as the Crimson Stone, could only be obtained under rare circumstances, and its drop rate was extremely low. In his previous life, Shin had been in this very dungeon, but his team had failed to defeat the orc demon. He had only been able to watch as another group obtained the artifact. That memory remained vivid, fueling his determination. The players discussed how valuable the Crimson Stone was, noting that it could activate the delay skill and could be sold for a large profit. Shin listened carefully, as this was the first time he had heard about the delay skill, something he urgently needed. Now he had a chance to obtain it, provided the captain agreed. Knowing that rewards were based on contribution, Shin understood that defeating the monster himself would grant him the artifact. The captain, however, grew suspicious of the young man's intentions and hesitated to agree, unwilling to part with such a valuable reward. Meanwhile, the other players dismissed Shin as reckless, believing he had become overconfident after defeating a few orcs. Shin ignored their remarks, remaining focused on his goal. The captain eventually calmed the group and allowed Shin to act as he wished. But with a condition, he declared that the newcomer would only face the orc demon if the main team failed to defeat it. His tone made it clear that this was not a suggestion but a firm decision. Shin realized that this outcome worked in his favor as he preferred to conserve his strength. The captain then instructed him to stay back while the team advanced toward the boss. Though outwardly composed, the captain felt irritated, determined to prove that experience outweighed raw talent. The team soon arrived at a massive door leading to the boss chamber. The captain pushed it open, revealing a vast hall where a towering figure stood waiting. Deep within the chamber was a monstrous orc holding a massive axe, with a glowing crimson stone embedded in its chest. The creature radiated a terrifying presence. The captain ordered his team to prepare for battle as they carefully assessed the enemy, each of them bracing themselves for the confrontation ahead. The orc demon looked terrifying, but in reality, defeating it is easy. The captain ordered his men to surround the monster and attack together. More than anything, he wanted to prove to Shin that teamwork was essential, especially in a place where survival mattered most. A group of players armed with weapons charged toward the orc demon under the captain's command. But in the very next moment, the captain was lying on the ground with blood covering his face, barely breathing. He could not understand what had just happened. His mind was completely disoriented. Shin sat on the side and became nervous the moment everyone rushed the monster at once. It reminded him of his previous life, when his own group made the exact same mistake and lost the battle. The team members quickly turned toward their captain, asking what they should do next because none of them wanted to die. Shin looked at the orc demon and realized that this monster was just as powerful as the enemy he had once faced before. At that moment, he became convinced that following random YouTube advice was useless. The captain immediately ordered everyone to retreat, saying that there was no reason to defeat the monster today. Shin suddenly smiled, confusing the other players because it was already obvious that this was no ordinary orc. The captain ignored their reactions and repeated his order. The players obeyed with relief, since none of them wanted to die against a mere mid-level boss. The captain then warned Shin that if he stayed behind, he should not blame anyone once he got injured and felt death approaching. Shin took those words as approval to fight the orc demon himself. He drew his sword and declared that he refused to die today. By then, the orc had grown impatient, waiting for the players to settle their yappings. The monster grabbed its big axe and charged forward. Shin understood that if he relied only on raw stats, he stood no chance against the demon orc. However, he possessed years of combat experience from his previous life. In a single leap, Shin jumped onto the monster's head. By then, the other players had already left the hall, but the captain suddenly heard the sound of metal crashing and froze in shock. He wondered if Shin had really managed to knock the axe out of the orc's hands. At that moment, Shin shook his exhausted hand while realizing that running was the only thing keeping him alive. The rage-baited orc demon growled furiously as the crimson stone embedded in its chest glowed. Shin ignored the monster entirely and focused only on the stone he had long searched for. There was a reason he was obsessed with obtaining that artifact. He possessed the Demon Bash skill, and when paired with the Delay skill, it could create a special effect. The problem was that improving the stun ability was extremely difficult. However, because he possessed the artifact Devouring skill, he could combine abilities together. If successful, it would create an infinite stun combination. To make it happen, Shin needed to rage bait the enemy into attacking him repeatedly. He stopped hiding and deliberately moved in ways that would anger the orc demon. The monster charged at him. Shin moved quickly, avoiding fatal blows while delivering only shallow cuts in return. He knew those attacks would never kill the monster, but they allowed him to locate its weak points. After observing, he activated the Demon Bash skill. Instantly, the orc demon froze in place, stunned and unable to move. The captain stared in disbelief because the delay skill should never have worked on a mid-level boss. Shin understood that ordinary orcs were dumbass, but this creature was an orc demon. As soon as the stun ended, the monster roared and kicked at him with its massive foot. Shin slammed his sword into the ground and used all his strength to block the attack. Suddenly, he remembered something from his previous life, the regenerative abilities possessed by demon orcs. Their regeneration could shorten stun effects and remove them earlier than expected. Because of that regeneration, Shin realized he would need time before he could stun the monster again. That was exactly why he needed the delay effect. If stunning failed, then he would have to defeat the demon orc another way. The demon orc attacked again, but Shin dodged as the giant axe buried itself into the floor. The players watched the battle from afar as if they were witnessing a scene from a game. Most of them believed they needed to retreat immediately because even Shin could not properly defeat the orc demon. Everyone saw that the stun skill was ineffective and that the difference in stats was overwhelming. Still, the strange smile on Shin's face left them confused. They believed he was already losing. But at that moment, Shin decided it was finally time to end the fight. He had already experienced this situation once before in his previous life. Whenever he faced an enemy stronger than himself, he needed to focus all his power on a single strike instead of trying to overpower them directly. Just then, the monster launched another attack. Shin immediately recognized the perfect opportunity. He thrust his sharp sword directly into the orc demon's axe, and the weapon instantly began crumbling apart into fragments. Without hesitation, Shin pushed his blade deeper until it pierced straight into the monster's chest. A notification instantly appeared, announcing that he had defeated the mid-level rage-baited boss. Several level-up notifications followed immediately after, and he officially obtained the title of Demon Hunter. Shin was extremely satisfied because he had already earned 2 titles, proving once again that he was stronger fighting alone than with a team. Soon the other players approached him, completely speechless after witnessing the battle. Shin realized he needed to explain the situation before things became awkward. He suddenly grabbed his thigh, pretended to groan in pain, and claimed that he had nearly died. He insisted that without the captain weakening the orc demon first, he would never have survived. The players quickly agreed because the captain had participated in the battle earlier. The captain looked confused at first and could not understand why everyone was praising him. Shin stared directly at Captain, hoping he was smart enough to understand that he was being given a chance to preserve his cute pride. The captain stayed silent, but his eyes shifted toward the magnificent artifact that appeared after the mid-level boss died. Shin hoped the captain would honor his promise regarding the artifact. After finally regaining his senses, the captain announced that it was now time to prepare for the final boss. The team followed him out, convinced that Shin had been far too weak to defeat the orc demon alone. Although everyone desired a stun skill for themselves, they now believed it was completely useless. Shin waited patiently until everyone finally left the room before approaching the artifact himself. He stared at the crimson stone and thought about devouring it immediately. Soon he entered the unconscious state required for absorbing artifacts. Inside that strange mental space, the crimson stone transformed into a bowl of noodles covered with meat and sauce. Shin happily devoured the meal, turning this manhwa into a mukbang video, believing once again that luck was on his side because resisting such a delicious dish was impossible. The process of absorbing the artifact was almost complete when a notification suddenly appeared regarding the delay effect. Shin could not understand why he felt so excited, but now the young man had gained the ability to add the delay effect to his skills. He immediately applied the delay effect to the demon's strike, allowing him to use the stun effect several times in succession. However, with every hit, both the power and duration of the stun gradually weakened. Even so, Shin still managed to secure a guaranteed 4-second stun. Although the effect was somewhat weak, the young man believed it was more than enough to fight properly. The captain then approached him and asked if they could have a serious conversation. He explained that they were now standing before the final boss room, where an orc demon was waiting behind the door. The captain admitted that he did not want Shin to participate in the battle. He explained that he could not properly lead as captain while such a powerful player existed within his squad. Captain Yoon then reached out and offered to cooperate with him, and Shin accepted the proposal. However, the young man reminded him that his conditions remained unchanged. He still intended to keep any artifacts he personally earned. One of the players approached Captain Yoon to report that the group was fully prepared and noticed the two shaking hands. Captain Yoon confirmed that the raid was about to begin and ordered everyone to get ready. However, the player who had always served as the captain's boyfriend and assistant immediately felt jealous after witnessing the scene. Meanwhile, Captain Yoon appeared to be in an unusually good mood. He announced to the team that this would be their final battle, and afterward he suggested that everyone should head to a cafe together for drinks. Soon the players arrived at the final boss room. The place was a massive stone hall with a terrifying monster standing at its center. The orc demon radiated pure hatred. Its enormous muscular body made it look overwhelmingly powerful. It was a berserker. Captain Yoon declared that he and the frontline fighters would attack first, while Shin was ordered not to interfere for the moment. However, the rookie stepped forward and instructed everyone to remain close to him as he drew his longsword. Shin knew that berserk orcs possessed lower resistance than ordinary demon orcs, making them easier to stun. The young man planned to calmly overwhelm the berserker after immobilizing it and believed the battle would end without much trouble. But before anyone could react, the boss suddenly charged forward in a furious roar. Despite the terrifying sight, Shin felt completely confident. Never before had he entered battle with such excitement. In the past, he had been afraid of everything and had not even started as a player, but merely as a porter. Years passed while he struggled just to survive. Whenever he attempted to join a proper player squad, he was rejected because his abilities were considered too weak. However, Shin understood that he could no longer remain the same person. He had to officially finish his self-improvement era. Shin refused to repeat the mistakes of his previous life and was determined to create a better future. To achieve that goal, he needed to prove not only to everyone else but also to himself what he was truly capable of. The entire team gathered near the entrance of the hall and watched as Shin effortlessly dodged the orc's attacks. Then, at the perfect moment, he leaped forward and slashed across the monster's body with his longsword. Purple blood sprayed violently in every direction. Shin immediately shouted that the orc would remain stunned for 4 seconds. The players instantly rushed forward under Captain Yoon's command and launched a coordinated assault. The team performed exceptionally well. Individually, their attacks dealt only minor damage, but together it became more than enough. Soon the final boss of the dungeon, the orc berserker, collapsed. The players could hardly believe how easily the fight had ended. Of course, they understood that everything had become possible because of Shin's carrying their asses. The members of the porter team had already begun arguing among themselves over who would become the personal porter of this miracle player. Shin overheard their conversations and quietly noted how quickly they had changed their attitudes. The same people who once ignored him were now desperately trying to become his friends, despite the fact that he had absolutely no intention of helping them. At that moment, multiple notifications appeared announcing his level increase, along with a newly earned title known as Unrivaled in Strength. The young man realized that he had gained more titles in a single day than he had received throughout his entire previous life. Although the achievement felt satisfying, Shin understood that his current level was still far from enough to become the player he dreamed of becoming. The strongest swordsman in Korea, Do Byung-so, possessed countless titles such as Ghostly Blade, Collector, and Perfect Sword, all earned within only 2 years of entering the game. Byung-so had always been Shin's idol, and before time reversed, the legendary player had already surpassed level 500. But now, Shin finally felt that he might one day catch up to him if he continued working hard. Shin became so lost in thought that the others began staring at him strangely, forcing the young man to quickly come up with an excuse by claiming that he was merely stretching. Captain Yun then thanked him for his efforts and handed him a reward. It was an artifact. Shin never expected such generosity and immediately asked why he was suddenly being rewarded. The captain replied that he understood how to show gratitude, and besides, the item was only a bronze rank artifact, so giving it away was not a problem for him. In truth, the captain only handed over the artifact because it was cheap. If it had been something valuable, he would have kept it for himself without hesitation. Deep down, Captain Yun simply hoped that he would never meet Shin again. Although he regretted thinking that way, he understood that the young man existed on an entirely different level that ordinary players could never reach. However, this decision greatly angered the player who had long served as the captain's right-hand man. The man believed the situation was completely unfair. Consumed by jealousy and hatred, he secretly took out his phone and arranged something that would soon place both the captain and Shin in mortal danger. After the dungeon had been fully cleared, Shin returned home. The young man was now in an incredibly good mood after finally understanding why he had chosen to become a player instead of remaining a porter forever like in his previous life. Most of that happiness came from the large amount of money he had earned. It appeared that Captain Yoon had transferred double the promised payment into Shin's account. On top of that, he also received a bonus reward after clearing the dungeon. It was a Berserker Ring, a bronze-grade artifact capable of granting a relief effect. Although the artifact ranked only at bronze level, Shin still appreciated receiving the lightness effect for free. The ability could reduce the weight of weapons at the cost of consuming 1 mana point every second. Most players would completely exhaust their mana before even properly lifting their weapons. However, Shin understood these details perfectly because of the experience he gained throughout his previous life. Back then, he had spent years studying every subtle aspect of his abilities. In his former life, he frequently used artifacts that required mana, and the results had surprised him greatly. Artifacts that depended on mana consumption would still retain their penalties even when modified, while the mana cost itself remained unchanged. Because of that knowledge, Shin immediately decided to fuse mana with the Berserker Ring. Now that he possessed a large amount of money, the young man no longer worried about penalties. He believed that the more skills and artifacts he acquired, the easier it would become to earn even larger amounts of money in the future. Meanwhile, a unique atmosphere filled one of the city's private nightclubs, a place reserved exclusively for elite guests. Inside the club, player informed several men and women that the arrogant rookie truly possessed a 4-second stun ability. One of the men listening to him calmly responded that there was no reason to shout or act aggressively. The speaker was a massive muscular man who then asked what exactly the red-haired player wanted from him. The red-haired man explained that the rookie clearly possessed money and was most likely using a rare artifact connected to stun abilities. However, the thug still failed to understand what the redhead was trying to suggest. The red-haired player nervously admitted that he was merely proposing cooperation, but before he could continue speaking, another man suddenly interrupted the conversation. The newcomer appeared extremely interested in everything he had just heard. However, the discussion immediately ended after the red-haired player suddenly had his ears sliced off. A very powerful and confident player held a glass of alcohol in one hand and a long sword in the other, using it to slice off the stranger's ear. The bandit declared that they were not servants who would blindly follow orders and demanded immediate payment if the stranger wanted anything done. The man's appearance was unforgettable. He had 3 vertical scars covering one eye. The bandit demanded compensation for the severed ear and asked where the target could be found. The player's training ground was located in a beautiful area, and Shin now spent most of his time there practicing his new skills before entering the dungeon. The young man received cold cucumber soup from the Berserker's Ring. Of course he ate it, but it still upset his stomach. Even so, there was an advantage to it. Shin could now wield a sword with ease. He could toss and spin it effortlessly, as though it weighed nothing at all. The lightning effect had drastically reduced the weapon's weight. Shin remained constantly active. For the time being, he decided to use a 2-handed sword because he feared accidentally losing control of the weapon. After practicing one of his skills, the young man realized that everything was progressing smoothly and that he was ready to move on to the next stage. Shin carefully checked his indicators and stats before realizing that he needed a constellation. Since a player could only possess one constellation, the decision required careful consideration. If given the choice, he would select one that matched his strongest stat. Ideally, he wanted the constellation of luck. However, the young man understood that his current stats were far too low to attract the attention of any constellation. With no other options available, Shin returned to the training hall and spent countless hours there. After finishing his intense workout, exhaustion overwhelmed him and he immediately drove away. Shin spent 3 straight days training relentlessly while also spending long hours driving, but the effort paid off when he acquired a new skill. Eventually, the young man arrived at the gates of a dungeon designed exclusively for solo players. Such dungeons were extremely rare, and other players often waited an entire month just for a chance to enter one. Shin realized how fortunate he was to have enough money to pay for immediate access. While approaching the entrance, the young man noticed a lone car hidden among the bushes nearby. He could not understand who would follow him through the forest. Their intentions remained unclear, but there was no reason to waste time outside because the truth would reveal itself inside the dungeon. Moments later, a group of players stepped through the gate into the solo dungeon. They were the same bandits hired by a player from Captain Yoon's team to handle dirty work. Although the dungeon was designed for only one player, the intruders entered without hesitation. Deep inside the room sat a lone young man with his sword planted beside him. Shine assumed they had entered by mistake since the dungeon had been reserved for him alone. However, the men ignored the question completely. Confident in their strength, they stared at the young man with mocking smirks. Shine remarked that they looked like an unusual team and suggested that they leave quietly, promising not to report what they had done. He carefully examined his opponents and quickly noticed the absence of healers and mages. The group had abandoned the balance necessary for surviving dungeons and instead formed a squad made entirely of swordsmen and archers. They were not adventurers. The massive brute mocked the young man, claiming that he acted like a powerful player even though death inside the dungeon would leave him with no chance of recovery. Sean remembered that groups like these had once been wiped out under the strict supervision of the Players' Association. Among enemies like them, archers were always the most troublesome opponents. At that moment, one of the archers announced that they needed to finish the job quickly. Sean responded that he had intentionally waited for them. He added that the dungeon was the perfect place to dispose of bodies if necessary. The bandits were enraged by those words. The giant thug prepared to charge forward, but the gang leader stopped him immediately. The leader announced that they would handle things the easy way. The brute failed to understand what that meant and declared that he only wanted to tear out the arrogant player's tongue. Sean mocked the thug, comparing him to an obedient dog that only followed its master's commands. Unable to tolerate the insult, the thug immediately rushed toward the player. Shin remained perfectly calm. He understood that the true law of dungeons was survival of the fittest. Monsters always tried to kill players inside dungeons, but sometimes the enemies were humans instead. Weak people died, while the strong survived. Inside a dungeon, rules no longer existed. It was always a matter of killing or being killed. In his previous life, Shin had experienced countless situations like this, but now he intended to use that knowledge much earlier in life. To him, everything that happened inside the dungeon could be justified as self-defense. Without hesitation, Shin drew his sword and sliced the charging thug cleanly in half. He then looked toward the remaining bandits and questioned why none of them had attacked yet. The criminals snapped out of their shock and immediately retreated alongside their leader. The gang leader ordered everyone to maintain their distance while instructing the archer to provide cover fire as they repositioned themselves. The archer agreed, although he was still horrified after witnessing the giant get cut in half before his eyes. He could not understand how it had happened. Shin had only recently awakened, yet his strength already resembled that of a player who had surpassed the 100th level. Meanwhile, Shin stood calmly in the center of the room, spinning his sword across his fingers as though it weighed absolutely nothing. He asked where his new companions had suddenly disappeared to. At that moment, the archer drew his bow and fired directly at him. To the bandit's disbelief, Shin effortlessly sliced every arrow into pieces with his sword. Immediately afterward, he hurled the weapon straight toward the archer. Only then did the bandits realize that the stranger was far from the helpless fool they had expected. Shin charged after the fleeing bandits with visible excitement. The criminals suddenly realized that the young man was completely unarmed because his sword remained lodged in the archer's chest. As Shin moved to retrieve his weapon, the surviving bandits rushed forward to intercept him. The moment he grabbed the sword, the enemies surrounded him and raised their blades, preparing to punish the unknown player who had slaughtered their comrades. One of the bandits swung his weapon, fully confident that he would strike Shin. However, he ended up cutting down his own comrade without even touching his target. Shin gripped his sword tightly by the hilt as he hovered above him in the air. The bandits immediately realized that they were facing a true psychopath. At that moment, the bandit leader named Juntae grabbed the back of his comrade's head. The man did not even have time to understand what his boss intended to do before Juntae hurled him straight toward the attacking enemy. In an instant, only two of them remained. Shin believed the bandits were secretly involved in selling human organs. He was convinced that the gangsters stayed united not because of trust but because they shared the same goal of collecting mana stones through organ transplants. Shin understood that his youthful appearance did not make him look experienced. But in the end, his assumption proved correct, and the gangster did not care where the young man had learned such information. The insolent witness had to be eliminated before he could expose everything. Juntae raised his sword toward the young man's head, intending to kill him instantly. However, Shine activated the Demon Strike skill. The bandit suddenly froze in place, stunned long enough for Shine to take advantage of the opening. Juntae recalled receiving several tiny scratches while grabbing his comrade's head, but he never imagined that such small wounds would be enough to seal his fate. Shine declared that everything was over. Juntae could not believe those words. He could not comprehend the fact that he was about to die so meaninglessly. Throughout his entire life, he had always been the one who killed others, never the one being hunted. He would approach weaker players who were only beginning their journey and gain their trust before brutally murdering them without mercy. But now that death stood directly in front of him, the bandit was visibly terrified after realizing that he had nowhere left to run. After everything ended, Shin washed the blood from his sword in the nearest river and reflected on the fact that he still did not need to grow accustomed to killing, especially since he had only recently become young again. Unfortunately, the guy now had little chance of signing a contract with the Constellation. Shine understood, of course, that it had merely been self-defense on his part, but he had no choice except to act that way. Suddenly, Shine noticed a huge pile of artifacts scattered across the ground near him. The guy received a total of 8 artifacts after surviving the fall, and it turned out that all of them now belonged solely to him. After cleaning his weapons and tidying himself up, Shine got dressed, straightened his clothes, and heard the sound of a new message arriving. The guy immediately checked the information and realized that all his stats had increased. Of course, he would have preferred to avoid the unpleasant situation he had experienced, but the results were definitely worth it. Shine noted that judging purely by his stats, he was already as strong as a level 50 player. It was incredible how quickly his strength had increased after rejuvenation. The growth rate itself seemed completely exponential. In addition, something suddenly slipped out of the player's pocket. Shin picked up a restoration ring from the ground. It was a silver artifact capable of eliminating any abnormal status effects. The first thug who attacked Shin had possessed this artifact. It was surprising that such a player owned an item capable of removing status anomalies. This meant that if Shin had relied entirely on stunning attacks, he would have lost today's battle against the bandits. Inside the dungeon stretched an underground road, and along it walked a group of orcs carrying their loot. Shin could finally begin clearing the dungeon, so he stepped forward to meet the orcs. The guy walked carefully along the rails while gripping his sword with both hands. His eyes were covered with a black bandage because he was fulfilling the requirements needed to obtain the title Lucky Day. According to the condition, the player needed to kill 500 enemies while keeping his eyes closed. The orcs heard and noticed the player approaching, immediately turning toward him with irritated expressions. Shin could not attack because he was unable to see his opponents. Instead, he waited for their movements, hoping to destroy the orcs while defending himself. Shin focused entirely on sensing the presence of the orcs, listening carefully to their wheezing and smacking sounds. Shin understood that he needed to feel the movement of the air and pay close attention to every subtle sound around him. Finally, one of the orcs rushed toward the boy while wheezing and growling with an axe clutched tightly in its hands. Shin waited patiently for the perfect moment before swinging his sword around himself, instantly cutting the orcs to pieces. After that, silence filled the dungeon, and the young man realized he had already eliminated the first group of orcs. Shin felt satisfied with such an excellent start. It gave him hope that he would succeed. But suddenly a shot echoed from somewhere in the distance, forcing him to react instantly despite being blindfolded. Shen felt pleased with himself because he successfully caught the arrow and snapped it in half. The orc archer stared in complete shock. Even though the creature was stupid, it had never encountered an opponent like this before. Shen explained that he had recently gone through a difficult situation, and because of that experience, he had been able to revisit memories from his past. Through those memories, the young man had sharpened his senses. However, regardless of that improvement, he still needed to remain extremely careful. Of course, Shen could not see that the entire dungeon behind the archer was overflowing with orcs. Even so, the young man turned toward them and demanded that they attack him. Immediately afterward, a massive horde of orcs charged toward the player, ready to rip him apart. The young man handled his sword brilliantly, and before long the entire dungeon was covered with the blood and remains of slaughtered orcs. The last surviving orc crawled toward its comrades, while Shen stood silently in the center of the bloody massacre. Soon afterward, information regarding a level up appeared before him. Shin obtained the title Lucky Day and finally removed the blindfold from his eyes. The guy did not even feel like he had struggled much to earn this title. The Lucky Day title possessed a very interesting effect. Whenever the young man defeated monsters of the same type, his luck stat increased. This was an excellent sign because another group of orcs suddenly appeared around the corner. The orcs became furious when they saw their comrades lying across the floor in pieces like broken soup sets. Shin greeted the orcs with a satisfied smile. He decided to immediately test his new title and use it as an opportunity to gain additional stats. Completing the task caused no problems, and the guy's luck stat increased dramatically. Shin noticed that his luck had already risen by 30 points thanks entirely to his new title. In truth, the bonus effects surpassed most platinum-grade stats. The young man happily admired his new abilities when a strange red glow suddenly began appearing behind him. Shin thought that perhaps in this life he might finally be able to afford buying a house. However, a notification suddenly appeared informing him that the surroundings around him were beginning to blur. The young man never expected such a thing to happen so quickly. It turned out that 3 constellations were offering the player a contract: the Cleaner of the Fallen Dimension, the Pilgrim of the Great Space, and the Goddess of Luck. Shen became completely delighted because everything happened so quickly. Besides, there were 3 constellations standing before him at once. The Goddess of Luck approached Shen and stared at him with a serious expression. Shen assumed it was because of his excessive confidence and reckless audacity. The young man did not know how he should behave because nothing like this had ever happened during his past life. However, the goddess of luck suddenly folded her arms and smiled sweetly toward the player, clearly showing interest in cooperating with him. The goddess of luck felt intrigued because she had never seen a lucky fencer before. The young man felt overwhelming relief as he realized that all three constellations truly wished to sign a contract with him. Why should the guy not take advantage of this opportunity and allow the cleaner of the fallen dimension to bless him for his hidden cruelty? That constellation often encountered players who slaughtered countless enemies, so it became interested in the young man after he destroyed such a massive number of orcs in such a short time. The Pilgrim of the Great Space showed interest in the young man's true intentions. It remained unclear why the constellation had appeared before him. Perhaps it only appeared before players capable of eventually becoming saints. Shin looked at all three constellations and carefully considered what decision he should make. The young man guessed that the Pilgrim of the Great Space appeared because it had sensed the goddess of luck nearby. This goddess remained extremely popular, even among other constellations. The goddess of luck explained that she had no exclusive demands, meaning the player could choose another constellation while still maintaining contact with her later. This was incredible news and opened entirely new possibilities. It sounded like an unbelievable achievement within the gaming community. An archer capable of striking targets even while firing into empty space thanks entirely to the blessings of this world, never needed to fear running out of arrows. In reality, all of it became possible due to contracts with two constellations, and one of those beings was the goddess of luck herself. Shin still struggled to process the fact that three constellations had appeared before him simultaneously. Shin needed time to properly think everything through. However, the constellations insisted that he cast aside his worries and choose his own fate. One of the constellations even remarked that perhaps it had made the wrong decision by appearing before him. Shin understood that the goddess of fortune was an incredible constellation without question. But if the other constellations eventually decided not to choose him, then the player's fate would be decided immediately. In his previous life, more than 10 years had passed since the boy first became a player, yet not a single constellation had contacted him. Then one day, only one constellation finally reached out to him. It was the late blossoming of a model student. Its appearance had felt like salvation itself. Shin became ecstatic. Although his life remained miserable, the young man believed a brighter future might finally await him. Unfortunately, years passed without anything truly changing. Even after obtaining a constellation, the player remained trapped in the same miserable circumstances. Because of that experience, the young man no longer placed blind faith in constellations solving every problem in his life. There were always absurd requirements attached whenever he attempted to change something about his status. In his previous life, the guy had been unable to properly use the constellation's power. However, when he thought about it carefully, it was thanks to that constellation that the young man gained the opportunity to return to the past. Because of that, he still felt grateful. Nevertheless, those experiences taught him that he needed to remain cautious and attentive, since he would most likely never receive a third chance to live his life. The young man shifted his gaze between the constellations standing before him. He could choose the holy powers and pursue the path toward sainthood, or he could walk the path of destruction and become one of the deadliest killers in player history. He could also embrace luck and use it to achieve greatness in countless different fields. In the end, the guy finally made his decision and accepted the invitation of one constellation. That constellation was the goddess of luck, with whom he immediately signed a contract. If the player died, the contract would remain active for 30 years. A notification then appeared, stating that a being from another dimension was closely watching the player through the goddess of luck. Friendly constellations congratulated the pair and wished them success, while several hostile constellations that had planned to sign contracts with Shin declared they would do everything possible to stop his progress. The young man could not understand why his personality attracted so much interest or why so many beings had suddenly become invested in his fate. Shin had decided that there was no reason to dwell on the matter any longer and wished everyone good luck. The goddess of luck extended her hand toward the young man and expressed admiration for his wise decision. Shin immediately checked his system, and what he saw there completely captured his attention. He could not even continue speaking with the goddess of luck, because the notification stated that he would now become truly fortunate in life. Numerous bonuses, unique artifacts, and opportunities to obtain the best titles and rewards had now become available to him. Shin could barely calm himself as he continued reading about the countless opportunities now placed before him, including chances to level up and increase his stats several times over. The goddess of luck then asked the player what he planned to do about the offers from the other constellations. Shin replied that he intended to remain focused on his goddess, while the other constellations could return to their own affairs. The response sounded weird, but the Pilgrim of the Great Space stated that he would wait for them during their next meeting. Meanwhile, the Cleaner of the Fallen Dimension promised that he would eventually knock the player's head from his shoulders. The Goddess of Luck praised the player for remaining firm in his decision, but the young man already understood that, with the effects he had obtained, he no longer needed to fear upcoming battles. Afterward, Shin began searching for the room containing the final boss because he still had not fully cleared the solo dungeon. The moment he encountered the final boss, the young man rushed into battle with newfound confidence, especially knowing that the Goddess of Luck herself was watching over him. Shin struck the final boss, and wondered whether the creature was truly that weak because landing attacks felt surprisingly easy. The young man continuously swung his sword at the massive orc, but the monster successfully defended itself and refused to give him an opening. The dungeon's final boss was the greedy Goblin Lord, and the creature possessed considerable strength. Suddenly, the Goblin Lord activated a hidden skill and inflicted the status ailment known as depression. Shin instantly lost the ability to move and stood frozen in place, though he had already expected the monster to use such a skill against him. Of course, the effect was unpleasant, but it was nowhere near as dangerous as a stun effect. The depression status forcibly weakened the target's will to continue fighting. The young man immediately activated his recovery skill. At that exact moment, the goblin was already preparing to split the guy apart with its axe. After activating the recovery skill, the young man decided it was finally time to test his luck. Thanks to the recovery skill, the depression effect was instantly removed. The young man then activated Demon Strike, and the Goblin Lord was immediately stunned. Shin quickly noticed that the stun duration was reduced to nearly half of its usual length, so he rushed forward without hesitation, delivering rapid slashing attacks with his sword. He then applied a delay effect, extending the stun duration for a few additional seconds, keeping the monster immobilized long enough for continued pressure. While the Goblin Lord remained restrained, Shin closed the distance and began analyzing and targeting its weak points in real time, treating the fight as practical combat training. He repeatedly changed his abilities, using the delay effect again to re-extend the stun window, allowing him to maintain control over the battle's pace. Moving around the monster with calculated precision, he delivered continuous slashing strikes, prolonging the engagement while maximizing both his damage output and skill efficiency. Eventually, Shin delivered the finishing blow, defeating the final boss and successfully clearing the Dark Goblin Swamp dungeon. He was rewarded with a level increase and a new title. Exhausted, he finally allowed himself to relax, realizing how demanding the day had been. From a life-threatening encounter with gangsters to clearing a dungeon in succession, he questioned internally why he had been forced into such relentless circumstances as he tried to recover his breath. At that moment, the goddess of luck appeared before him and stated that his misfortune was far beyond normal bad luck, implying it was something greater than coincidence. She further declared that luck would now frequently accompany him, insisting that luck itself was a skill. She also claimed that all of his achievements that day were partly due to her influence. Shin, despite his exhaustion, continued doing what he enjoyed most. As the situation around him settled after the battle, he began allocating bonus points to the luck stat, and soon the indicator exceeded 100. The dodge stat affected reaction speed, but his attention quickly shifted toward the shield lying beside the slain final boss. The luck stat increased the chances of artifact drops, and this time a magnificent artifact awaited him. Shin understood that thanks to the goddess of luck, artifacts would always be guaranteed for him. Kunda's shield increased strength through mana and converted incoming damage into healing. Because of the blessing of luck, artifacts like this would continue appearing before him. The player then started synchronizing his mana with the shield of goodness. The goddess of luck was delighted that she could support her players so effectively. Not far from the player's town was a quest zone where players could spend time and rent dungeons for future exploration. The manager gave him a strict answer and refused his request. Shin explained that he understood the manager's concerns, but he insisted that he had his own reasons for entering. The manager demanded that he reconsider, yet the young man had already seen too many corpses that week to simply ignore the danger around him. He could not allow things to go wrong anymore. Before arriving there, he had spent several exhausting hours traveling by car along the highway. Shin hurried because he had exchanged the goblin shield for rice and kimchi, and fortunately everything worked out in the end. However, nearly every sensor in the vehicle signaled serious problems that required immediate repair. Shin realized that he needed a new car, but reaching the city mattered far more than visiting a dealership. Shin knew that lower-level players were often targeted by criminals, and he had no desire to live in constant fear. Moving to a safer location like Player's Town was the best decision he could make. Artifacts could not only be earned but also purchased, maintained, and upgraded. All of that required money, and the young man now fully realized how badly he needed funds. He knew of a place where he could earn a massive amount of money if everything went according to plan. Alongside the era of players, a quest system had appeared, and an organization known as the Players Association was responsible for managing it. If the system truly operated under the association's control, Shin believed he could handle it successfully. Eventually, despite the flashing warning lights on the car dashboard, he managed to arrive at the quest area. However, the manager immediately stopped him at the entrance. She explained that players were only allowed to enter dungeons appropriate for their level and were forbidden from challenging areas beyond their limits. Shin assured the manager that he would not create problems for the association and asked her to trust him. Although he was only level 17, he believed it would be a waste to use his powerful abilities in low-level dungeons. The manager remained firm and explained that she had heard similar claims many times before, only for those players to die shortly afterward. Players were expected to challenge areas that matched their level for a reason. Shin understood her point because many players overestimated themselves, but he had already decided to take the risk. He had no intention of wasting time in weak dungeons. Their heated argument soon attracted the attention of nearby players. Among them was Kim Miso, a level 100 player from the Eden Guild. She approached the manager and asked what was happening. Shin instantly recognized her. She was the famous pious archer, the first level 100 player to achieve an A+ rank. Aside from her overwhelming skills, she was also widely known as the daughter of the chairman of biotech. After the Shadow Assassin, the strongest assassin in the country, the greatest swordsman in Korea was Cho Jino. Kim Miso was connected to the company that held the largest share in the Eden Guild, making her one of the most influential players in history. The girl looked directly at Shin and asked if they had met before. Kim Miso admitted that she had been observing him for a while and wanted to know why he needed access to higher-level quests. Shin honestly answered that he needed money. The surrounding players were shocked that someone like Kim Miso was speaking to an unknown player. Many secretly hoped that she would reject the weak-looking stranger in front of her. However, Kim Miso calmly continued the conversation. She explained that the quest was extremely dangerous, but Shin insisted that he still intended to complete it. He understood that greater risks always brought greater rewards. The young man was not acting out of pride. In his previous life, Kim Miso had rejected his request to join her guild because he had not been strong enough. Although he still remembered that moment, Shin no longer held resentment toward her. Kim Miso then explained that completing quests alone was prohibited by the Players Association. Shin suddenly remembered that those restrictions would not disappear until several years later. Realizing there was no point in arguing further, he turned around and prepared to leave, explaining that he had other matters to handle. Before Shin could walk away, Kim Miso stopped him and revealed that she had an interesting idea. She suggested that he complete the quest together with her. The surrounding players immediately became jealous because they also wanted the chance to enter a dungeon beside such a famous and beautiful player. Shin remained cautious and instantly suspected that Kim Miso had another motive. He questioned what conditions she intended to place on the offer. Kim Miso asked why he assumed there had to be conditions instead of simple goodwill. However, Shin replied that experience had taught him not to trust people easily. Kim Miso admitted that bitter experiences could teach valuable lessons, but she assured him that she truly had no hidden demands. Instead, she simply wanted to clear the area alongside him. If his abilities turned out to be exaggerated, he would lose his life. But if his confidence truly matched his strength, Kim Miso promised that she would sincerely apologize for doubting him. Shin immediately accepted the challenge because there was no way he could ignore such direct provocation. Kim Miso's influence extended far beyond that of an ordinary famous player. Clothing brands she wore would instantly skyrocket in value, and countless articles were written based solely on her statements. If Kim Miso publicly labeled someone as arrogant or incompetent, that person's career would collapse almost immediately. Shin confirmed that he was ready to accompany her, and admitted that the situation sounded entertaining. A driver transported the players to the dungeon, and initially planned to remain nearby to wait for her return. However, Kim Miso instructed him to continue with his duties because they would be busy for quite some time. Most guild members had extremely tight schedules, and she understood how difficult it would have been to suddenly gather companions for a dungeon raid without prior preparation. After entering the administration building, Kim Miso overheard Shin's earlier conversation with the manager. The quest itself had strict minimum requirements, and even meeting those standards placed a heavy burden on most players. Yet she had unexpectedly encountered a mysterious young man overflowing with confidence. Since nobody knew his true identity, the mystery surrounding him only made the situation more intriguing for her. Kim Miso asked the manager which quest Shin had requested. The manager checked the registration form and provided the details. The chosen mission surprised everyone. It was not a gathering or hunting quest, but a defense quest that required players to defeat every monster in the area to succeed. There was a widely accepted rule among players that every 4-person party should include at least one member capable of long-range attacks. This reckless player intended to challenge such a dangerous quest, despite lacking a proper team. Without Kim Miso's assistance, he would almost certainly have died there. Shin then asked Kim Miso whether she was afraid because she had suddenly become quiet. He assumed that even someone as famous as her might feel nervous before entering such a dangerous dungeon. Shin suggested that if the quest felt too difficult, they could wait for other players, especially someone capable of dealing long-range damage or serving as a tank. Kim Miso replied that she was not afraid at all. The girl barely held herself back from calling him an overconfident fool. Instead, she forced a sweet smile and pressed the confirm button. The quest was accepted, and the players were immediately transported to the quest area. They appeared near the gate while the female manager remained extremely nervous. Even though Kim Miso was accompanying the newbie, she still feared that something terrible might happen. The surrounding players were equally shocked. None of them understood why a level 17 player would attempt such a dangerous quest filled with monsters meant for players above level 100. They were even more confused about why Kim Miso, the youngest A+ ranked player, had decided to help him. The Players Association had recently introduced a new ranking system because judging strength based only on level was considered inaccurate. The system now evaluated 2 important factors: the number of cleared dungeons and the player's combat instinct rating. Based on those standards, Kim Miso earned her A+ rank almost entirely because of her exceptional instincts during battle. The ranking simply meant that only a handful of players were stronger than her. None of that mattered to the others anymore because the newbie had entered a raid with the most admired female player in the association. Moments later, the dimensional gate disappeared along with the two players. The defense quest was called Night and Time of the Wolves. The battlefield was a dark city covered in silence and shadows. Kim Miso stood on top of a building with her bow prepared, while carefully observing the empty streets below. At the same time, Shin walked alone through the abandoned city. Kim Miso watched him carefully from the rooftop. If the situation became dangerous, she intended to help immediately, but part of her hoped the quest would teach him a lesson about his reckless confidence. Earlier, the two players had argued before entering the dungeon. Shin told her not to interfere unless he specifically called for assistance. In exchange, he promised to give her 5% of the rewards. The girl had been stunned by the proposal. She realized she would receive a share of the profits without even fighting. Although the offer sounded appealing, Kim Miso remained convinced that the young man would fail. Hundreds of wolves were expected to appear, and even a level 100 player like her would struggle to clear the quest alone. She warned him about the danger, but Shin confidently replied that she only needed to watch from the sidelines. The girl eventually gave up arguing and shouted that his reward share would decrease by 1% for every monster that escaped. She added that missing 95 wolves would leave him with nothing at all. A massive paw suddenly appeared nearby, followed by a threatening growl echoing through the streets. Several wolves stepped onto the road and surrounded the player. Shin shouted that he accepted her conditions because he was certain that not a single monster would escape. One enormous wolf revealed its sharp fangs while staring hungrily at him. The battle began instantly as both sides charged forward. Kim Miso watched nervously from above, worried that the young man might die in seconds. Instead, the first clash ended with complete destruction. The remains of the wolves were scattered across the road while Shin calmly leaped over their bodies. He casually remarked that the wolves actually looked cute up close, though he claimed his partner would never understand that. From the rooftop, Kim Miso realized that his confidence was not empty arrogance. His swordsmanship was flawless. Every movement displayed the perfect balance between offense and defense that experienced swordsmen always described. He minimized unnecessary movements and cut down several enemies with a single strike. The girl finally understood that Shin's confidence was supported by genuine skill. Even so, the number of wolves continued to increase, quickly surrounding him from every direction. Shin knew he was only level 17, but he still intended to prove he could handle the monsters alone. Kim Miso prepared to fire an arrow and join the battle, but something unbelievable suddenly happened. Shin activated Demon Strike, and the entire pack froze in place as if rooted to the ground. The stun effect shocked Kim Miso so much that she nearly lost her balance on the rooftop. She carefully counted the duration and realized the wolves remained stunned for more than 4 seconds, even longer than the effect produced by Jinyo. That meant Shin could safely apply additional status effects and eliminate the monsters without resistance. He immediately took advantage of the opportunity and slaughtered the wolves while they remained slowed and defenseless. After defeating the pack, Shin finally noticed a true opponent approaching from the darkness. A gigantic black wolf rushed toward him at incredible speed. In his previous life, he had encountered black wolves several times, so he immediately recognized the danger. The monster possessed the same stun ability he used himself. The moment their eyes met, Shin froze in place under the effect. Seeing this, Kim Miso realized she needed to intervene immediately. She activated an artifact and removed the stun effect affecting him. While focusing entirely on watching Shin, she had forgotten that the black wolf also possessed a stun skill. She initially believed someone at his level would never be capable of resisting it. However, before she could even react further, Shin suddenly recovered on his own and charged directly at the monster. The girl could not understand what she was witnessing. His sword stance was already extraordinary, his stun effect lasted abnormally long, and now he could even resist status effects despite his low level. The black wolf was equally confused. The monster expected its prey to remain immobilized, yet the player was already moving freely again. High above the beast and seized the perfect opening, he drove his long sword deep into the wolf's body without hesitation. Moments like that determine the outcome of battles, and the monster had completely lost control of the situation. The giant carcass collapsed directly onto Shin, covering him in mud and blood. He had originally hoped to dodge the body, but after realizing his clothes were already ruined, he decided to enjoy the fight even more and continue the massacre. Meanwhile, Kim Miso remained on the rooftop silently watching her partner. Her fear had almost disappeared. Instead, she became increasingly curious about his true identity. After killing several more wolves, Shin finally stood calmly among the corpses of the slain monsters. At that exact moment, a notification announcing his level up appeared before him. Shin was pleased with the results. In addition to leveling up, he had also received several new titles. He soon noticed the interested gaze directed at him from Kim Miso. The doubts in her eyes had completely disappeared and were replaced with careful observation. The young man realized that he now had an audience, so standing around doing nothing was no longer an option. It was time to finish the quest properly. At that moment, a new enemy emerged from the darkness. Shin immediately recognized the final boss, the Lord of the Full Moon Wolves. The enormous predator charged toward him without hesitation, but the young man already understood the creature's attack patterns. Shin struck the wolf and leaped over its body while predicting its next movement. However, the Demon Strike skill failed because the Wolf Lord resisted the effect. As expected, the final boss could block some of his abilities. Kim Miso watched the battle in disbelief. The fight was far more dangerous than she had imagined. The boss was not merely resisting attacks, it was actively countering Shin's abilities while enduring his relentless strikes. Despite wielding a massive sword, the young man swung it effortlessly as though it weighed nothing. He continuously attacked while searching for an opening in the monster's defense. At one point, the Wolf Lord slammed its massive paw toward him, but Shin raised his sword like a shield and blocked the strike. The beast believed its attack would overwhelm him and continued pressing forward, but Shin anticipated every movement. His experiences from his previous life allowed him to understand everything the monster was capable of. Kim Miso continued to watch the fight closely and realized that this was not just a life-and-death struggle. She guessed that the young man was simply demonstrating his strength. He was showing off in front of her. Kim Miso had never encountered such a player before. He was unlike any ordinary person. Shin decided it was time to end the fight as it had already lasted longer than he had expected. He had managed to show off sufficiently, but if something went wrong, he might not have enough strength left. He turned and ran, and the enraged leader of the wolves rushed after him. The young man ran very fast and wondered why he still had so much stamina left. If this continued, he would use up his strength faster than his opponent would die, and his stamina was already running out. But then the wolf did what it usually does. It delivered a powerful blow with a large window for a counterattack. In truth, it was a feint to land one deadly strike, a special pattern of the Wolf Lord that had claimed the lives of countless players. Shin stopped abruptly and assumed a defensive stance. He acknowledged to himself that he had never used this technique in actual combat, but sometimes one has to act rashly. As expected, the wolf lunged one paw at the player, gradually pulling back the other, the one meant to deliver the fatal blow. Kim Miso froze in horror as she watched. It appeared as though the player had been struck by the monster's paw. Everything around was covered in blood. Kim Miso understood then how foolish she had been. She could not even call herself a proper player. Even if the young man had shown incredible skill, she should not have just stood by. It was as if she had been killing Shin herself. Tears streamed down her face as she sobbed, begging forgiveness for not stepping in to help. Then suddenly she noticed a strange light coming from the battlefield. Kundis's shield was completely absorbed, crumbled to dust, and disappeared. The special effect sacrifice had been obtained as a result of the wipe. The conditional activation recovery ability proved useful during the absorption. The player had to choose a part of the body to apply the recovery effect to. Shin noticed that the body was divided into 16 parts, excessively specific. Usually the safest choice is the back, but here even the back was divided into zones, making it ineffective. With more care than usual, the young man finally activated sacrifice. The health recovery effect worked immediately. Had he miscalculated even slightly, he would have died instantly. But in the end, he had killed 2 birds with 1 stone. Shin activated non-demon strike against his opponent. The huge wolf froze, and the player thought that either he was very lucky or the wolf was simply unlucky. Shin had cut off the monster's right arm during the previous attack, and now used it to immobilize the beast. Still, it was not worth delaying, and the young man decided it was time to move on to the next challenge. Kim Miso had already climbed down from the roof and was standing nearby in a pool of wolf blood, watching the final blows. The immobilization did not work on the first attempt, but Shin managed to accomplish the task. The player stood next to the body of the monster, which was no longer resisting, slowly bleeding out, and was unsure whether to feel satisfied. At that moment, he heard Kim Miso approach from behind. The girl looked at him without saying a word, pleasantly surprised and amazed by his abilities. She was reluctant to admit that she had almost cried thinking he had died, and instead told him that she almost had a heart attack. She added that he should have mentioned he had healing skills, and then asked how he knew the patterns of the Wolf Lord, wondering aloud whether he was living a second life. Kim Miso had seen many swordsmen before, but none as mysterious as Shin. She could not find the words to describe what she was witnessing. Shin did not want to tell the truth and tried to make a joke of it. Kim Miso looked at him expectantly, hoping he would share his story. He told her that he felt some strange, inexplicable pressure coming from her. The girl stopped pressing him and said that he simply looked like a ranked player, and that it would be better to change the subject. It was indeed time to finish off the monster, and Shin took up his sword again. He said he would end its suffering swiftly. It truly was necessary. The wolf seemed ready to die. Shin ended up receiving his first title, ranked as Deadly Duel. He felt a slight nostalgia for his past life. The girl asked whether he had received a title, noting that after clearing an area, a new one is usually issued. Kim Miso mentioned that she had also gone through this dungeon alone, though it felt like cheating on her part. She finally admitted that she had absolutely nothing to be proud of, as she had cleared everything only through artifacts. Shin tried to reassure her and said that using artifacts was also a very important skill. Kim Miso replied that she had many artifacts and that they each cost more than 200 million won. Comparing that to a player who used a mass-produced two-handed sword sold everywhere for pennies, she felt ashamed. Just then, the title Deadly Duel was activated. With it, the young man could sense allies and opponents within a radius of several meters. Afterward, he grew flustered, deactivated the title and felt a little out of place. Kim Miso said that she was about to leave the dungeon but still needed to contact the porters. Shin knew that the rewards for completing tasks included monster byproducts, so calling the porters was necessary. He hoped he had looked reliable enough after dealing with the tasks, but suddenly remembered the promised reward he had yet to give the girl. Kim Miso told him that everything was fine and that he should not worry so much. She said that they would be seeing each other quite often from now on, and that he should treat the amount as her investment in him. Shin agreed to accept those terms, though he still felt he could not fully relax while in the girl's presence. Kim Miso had already left first, and the young man was just about to exit the dungeon when a light appeared behind him. He decided to immediately check the long-awaited reward and discovered a blue moonstone. Shin was trembling with impatience and excitement. The precious stone was imbued with the faith of the Silver Wolf tribe, a platinum-ranked item. The young man could not hold back his tears of joy and admiration. The platinum artifact was worth at least 1 billion won, equivalent to an apartment in the city center. The goddess of luck asked him whether he believed that this was the thrill of her touch. The one with the ripped lips strongly objected to the favorable luck the player was receiving, and suggested removing the goddess of luck from the player's system. However, the goddess of luck unexpectedly proposed putting it to a vote among the constellations connected to the player's system. The proposal was accepted unanimously, and the one with the ripped lips could no longer act as a constellation. Shin sat there dumbfounded, unable to comprehend how such actions could be permitted, but he knew that his goddess of fortune was quite popular. He decided to absorb about half of the platinum artifact. There was also an additional special effect that increased health regeneration and recovery speed, making him nearly monstrous whenever the moon rose. He synchronized the blue moonstone with his own abilities and was ready to leave the quest area. The young man entered the Players Association lobby looking like a completely different person, as if he had grown taller and stronger. Many players of different ages and types were waiting in the lobby. The anxious manager looked at him, still relieved that he had survived, and now understood that Shin had completed the quest on his own. Kim Miso would not lie to everyone, so she could be taken at her word. It was hard to imagine that anyone in their right mind would take on a level 100 quest while only at level 17. Any player would try to stop such a reckless person, and the manager had done her best to prevent it. Now she had to commit Shin's appearance to memory, as he would be coming here often. Shin even felt a little sorry for her. She had been genuinely worried about him. Then various players rushed toward him, offering to have him join their associations on better terms. Kim Miso stepped forward, apologized to the others, and told them that she needed to discuss something with Mr. Shine. She looked at the player with a glance that hinted at a tempting offer. Shine was glad that Kim Miso had saved him from the other players, though he was curious about her plan. The two of them got into her car and drove away from the Players Association. While they were driving, a large sum of money was credited to his account, a welcome surprise, especially given how quickly and generously the quest reward had come through. He admitted that he had never received so much money so quickly before. Kim Miso told him that she had contacted the porters and sped up the process. Shine was stunned by the amount and thanked her for looking after him. Kim Miso turned to the driver and he acknowledged that he understood his mistress. A privacy mode was activated inside the car and the two found themselves in an almost impenetrable enclosed space. Shine immediately anticipated that this was to be expected. Nothing good comes for free, and something serious was about to follow. Kim Miso said that she was not one to sugarcoat things. She got straight to the point and invited Shine to join the Eden Guild. Shine acknowledged that despite his lack of established credentials, the girl had chosen to show confidence in him. The Eden Guild was a true paradise for players, the dream of almost everyone. In his previous life, the young man had been a member of a very ordinary guild, and it had given him a sense of security. It was a small gathering of untalented players who had nowhere else to go. He had felt comfortable there until the incident in which all his comrades died, but now growing rapidly in strength, he did not need that kind of infrastructure. Such a guild could only become a burden. At this stage, playing alone would contribute to his rapid growth, so Shin decided to turn down this generous offer. Kim Miso asked if the guy wanted to start his own solo guild. The girl admitted that it was not difficult to guess given the young man's abilities. In addition, she was the daughter of the chairman of a large corporation, so she immediately thought on a large scale. Kim Miso was the only player who knew about this rapid growth. Shin noted that even though the girl knew he preferred to play alone, she still laid all her cards on the table and showed interest in him. The beauty was creating relationships that could benefit her in the future. She was an excellent negotiator. There was a separate town for players near Jamsil Station. The sales manager confirmed that according to the contract, the deposit was 100 million and the monthly payment was 5 million. Shin noted that the girl mentioned such frightening figures with a very sweet smile, and therefore they did not even seem scary. Though, however, the guy was not easily frightened and signed the contract because it really was a great deal, and many players dreamed of living there. Shin quickly found himself a new place to live, probably thanks to the goddess of luck. The guy opened the window, stood there, looked at the street, and thought about the global changes that had taken place in his life in such a short period of time. His mysterious return to the past and the sudden changes that followed were overwhelming, even for the young man himself. For days, the guy was focused only on figuring everything out and had no idea how to move forward. But soon, his worldview changed completely, and finally the young man could feel the blood rushing through his veins and life returning to his body. Moreover, it was not just anybody but a young and youthful one, and now the youth he felt would not let him sit still. So Shin firmly decided to live this life differently. He swore never to be a coward again. Moreover, opportunities for his growth continued to arrive, and it seemed that he did not even have to make any effort. But then the well-known reporter Park Jung called to gather information about the new star among the players. This was the same reporter who interviewed the most famous players. He had already heard about the quest with Miss Kim Miso. The reporter wanted to gather exclusive information and was now talking to Miss Miso about the recent quest. Shin thanked the girl for giving him a ride, but the beauty still had a little business to attend to. She said that she and her friends were going to explore the unknown gates in the near future. She was forming a free team of only 4 people with a level of at least 120. Shin did not even wait to hear her out. He immediately shouted that he was in and that she could count on him. Kim Miso was surprised because just recently the young man had rejected her guild offer, but this time he agreed immediately. This guy was becoming more and more interesting. The guy was happy to have the chance to enter the gate. Simply put, a dungeon is a fixed location. Once you enter, the entrance and exit are fixed, and traps and monsters act according to a predetermined program. But the gate is a constantly changing location. When you clear it, the exits and entrances change in real time, and sometimes even the monsters change. As always, the greater the danger, the better the reward. This is an unspoken rule of the gaming world, and if it is an unknown gate, a high-ranking artifact is guaranteed to drop. Kim Miso must have already received such an artifact because it was thanks to it that she was able to remove the Black Wolf's restriction. The girl said she would definitely contact the young man as soon as she found out more details, and most likely they would be in regular contact in the near future. Kim handed the young man her phone so he could save his number, but just as the young man took the phone, a message popped up, a reminder that she needed to meet with Gregory. Kim immediately snatched the phone back, apologized, and insisted that she just wanted him to write down his number. Kim herself did not understand what was happening to her and why she wanted to hide the fact that she was meeting Gregory from Shin. Shin knew that this guy had his own story. However, every player had a story and a lot of baggage behind them. Even Shin himself had a story that he did not want to tell anyone. If people found out that he had returned to the past, it could affect their attitude towards him. Shin was curious to know where this guy was now and what he was doing. After all, they had spent several years together and he could at least show his face. In the VIP room of the Eden Guild, Kim met with the player over a cup of coffee. The man said he intended to spend time with her for the first time in a long while. While the girl was constantly waiting for a message from someone and staring at her phone, Kim said she was waiting for a reply from Shin because they were going to explore new gates together. The guy immediately remarked that the girl was head over heels in love with this newcomer, but this player could maintain stability longer than anyone else, and had just as quickly rejected the offer to join the guild. The girl said there was no need to worry about it. Kim noted that the guy's sword skills were just as good as, if not better than, the man's. Joe Gino pointed out that comparing him to a newbie was a bit much.